Huawei certainly isn't the first brand coming to my mind when thinking about gaming monitors, and that's probably true for most of you as well. I guess the MateView GT27 is Huawei's attempt to change that. On paper at least, this is a proper 1440p gaming monitor with a refresh rate of 165Hz. Though the GT27 uses a curved VA panel, which often don't have the best reputation when it comes to their response times performance. So of course we're gonna see if the GT27 can keep up with the other monitors of its class. Huawei provided the monitor for the purpose of this review. They don't get any input on this video's production, and everything I say reflects my own and honest opinion. Now, one thing that Huawei got right is the design. This is a fairly inexpensive monitor, but the design and build quality really don't reflect its price. The bottom part of the stand is even made from metal and looks and feels premium. The form of that stand base though might be a bit controversial, because it's kind of an unusual shape and it takes up quite a bit space on the desk. Even though I think it looks kind of modern, I don't like that it extends past the display, which makes it harder to get the monitor close if you're using a large mousepad. Also, the stand can get in the way of your mouse quite easily. It didn't happen yet, but I really wouldn't like smashing my mouse into that metal stand. To be fair though, hardcore gamers are probably not the target audience of this monitor. This really is a monitor that's best used for watching videos or content consumption in general, or much more casual gaming. And that's largely because Huawei decided to go for a curved VA panel. This one is from TPV, as the factory menu tells us. It has a 1500R curve, which is relatively flat and somewhat reasonable for a 27-inch display. And in case you're worried about text clarity, this VA panel has a very standard pixel structure, unlike some other VAs, so text looks as sharp as it should be. And the backlight they're using with this panel is pretty beefy. I measured a maximum brightness of 450 nits. The lowest brightness setting is just 32 nits, which is one of the lowest I've ever seen. Safe to say that you will be finding an ideal brightness setting for pretty much every situation somewhere in between. As we'd expect from a VA panel, the contrast is really good as well, and I measured a contrast ratio of almost 2700:1. This isn't the highest contrast I've ever seen from a VA panel, but still far better than what a typical IPS monitor can achieve. And thanks to its good contrast ratio, I really enjoy the GT27 for watching videos, especially more cinematic stuff, which often is pretty dark, looks great on this monitor. The good backlight uniformity of my unit does help as well, and I could only really spot a slightly brighter area in the top right corner under normal conditions. If we compare this to an IPS panel under the same conditions, I think the contrast advantage of the VA panel becomes pretty clear. Interestingly enough though, Huawei kind of cheated a little to make the darker parts of the image look even darker. Here I have a correction applied via software that forces the GT27 to a standard sRGB gamma, and when I switch that off, the image becomes quite a bit darker. That's because Huawei decided to opt for a gamma with an average of about 2.5, which is much higher than what we typically use on a PC monitor. A gamma with an average of about 2.2 is pretty much the standard for computers, which appears much brighter than the default setting of the GT27. Gamma 2.5 is something we'd expect in a movie theater where the hall is completely blacked out. But it's certainly not something that works great on a computer. Now I will tell you how we can correct the gamma in a bit, but first let's take a look at the accuracy with default settings. Well, the gamma curve exceeds the scale I normally use, which really isn't surprising given how dark the image looks. And the other numbers don't look too promising either, but it's not a terrible result, and we can correct most of these things pretty easily. Huawei also provides an sRGB mode, but this doesn't really bring any meaningful improvements. It does clamp the color gamut and therefore is somewhat useful, but not really accurate either. So I'd rather dial in some custom settings. And what we can achieve here actually is pretty good. Still, the overall delta E is too high, but this can mainly be attributed to the larger than sRGB color gamut. As the delta H shows us, the color hues themselves are actually pretty accurate. Unfortunately, there is no gamma option in the monitor's menu, so we have to rely on software to fix the gamma. Though applying an ICC is a pretty easy way to fix this. These are the settings I recommend using in conjunction with the ICC profile that you can download from the video description. In case you don't know how to use an ICC profile, I'll link a guide in the top right corner. If you're following that guide, the gamma correction will be applied system-wide, and the program will make sure that it stays intact. Now this ICC won't clamp the color gamut though, unless you're using color managed applications like Photoshop and such. So expect other content like YouTube videos for example to look slightly oversaturated. I'm saying slightly here because we're talking about roughly 20% more saturation than what we'd consider standard. So don't expect crazy high oversaturation here. But also don't expect a full Adobe RGB or DCI-P3 coverage. But despite only covering 85% of the DCI-P3 color space, Huawei isn't shy to advertise nothing less than quote-unquote cinema-level P3 color, which is a bit dodgy if you ask me. So of course we don't get the color saturation that would be necessary for a great HDR experience. Now when it comes to HDR, the color space isn't the only thing that holds the GT27 back. The maximum brightness and contrast are also both too low for real HDR. Don't get me wrong though, for SDR standards this monitor is bright and has a good contrast ratio, but for HDR this just isn't good enough for the real HDR experience. Though what completely ruins the HDR mode for me is the clipped highlights. This scene from Eugene Belsky's HDR video demonstrates that nicely. The details on the eggshell become completely invisible as the image gets brighter and the highlights start clipping. This makes the HDR mode pretty much unusable, even though the contrast and maximum brightness of the GT27 would allow for an at least acceptable HDR image. So it's a curious decision by Huawei to not be including some kind of highlight roll-off for HDR. But the questionable decisions don't stop here. For some reason Huawei thought it was a good idea to hide the adaptive sync option by default. So the GT27 ships with adaptive sync turned off, with no visible option to turn it on. We actually have to perform a secret button combination which is not stated in the manual to make the adaptive sync option appear. Okay, it's not exactly complicated. All we have to do is pushing the directional toggle forwards and hold it there for about 10 seconds. Then the adaptive sync option pops up, which you need to activate in order to use FreeSync or G-Sync. Full credit to this guy from the Huawei forum for finding this out. Now, I was really scratching my head as to why Huawei decided to do this. I mean, the GT27 isn't even advertised as FreeSync or G-Sync compatible, so why would you get rid of a feature like this, that the monitor obviously has, and that you could advertise? And then I started testing adaptive sync on the GT27, and now I kind of understand. It flickers like crazy at refresh rates at around 60 Hz. Even with higher refresh rates, we get a lot of flickering when the frame rate fluctuates, like here for example with AOE 4. Adaptive sync is really only usable when you can maintain a stable refresh rate close to 165 Hz. It's pretty terrible otherwise, so I actually kind of understand why Huawei decided to get rid of the adaptive sync option. Now let's shift gears a little and have a closer look at all the response times related stuff. As always, we'll be using Brobust's pursuit camera technique for that. We're looking at a monitor that has a VA panel, so naturally we'd expect response times to be quite a bit slower with darker transitions than with brighter ones. And this is exactly what we're seeing with the GT27. Now the menu provides us with 4 additional levels of overdrive, so let's hope we can get rid of some of that VA smearing. Level 1 only brings a very tiny improvement in the brightest track, and the same is true for level 2 and for level 3 as well. Level 4 though makes a significant jump. Take a look at the brightest track, which basically has no smearing anymore. Though there's some weird stuff going on in the middle track, so we actually get a somewhat worse result here with level 4. So let's get rid of level 0, 1 and 2, which basically are useless, and check how level 3 and 4 compare at different refresh rates. At 144 Hz, we can actually start to see some blue appearing behind the UFO with level 4, which indicates that we're starting to see overshoot here. At 120 Hz, it gets worse, so in case you were planning to get this monitor for a console, you definitely want to be using level 3. At 60 Hz, level 4 becomes completely unusable, while level 3 still looks fine. So level 3 is the best mode at every refresh rate. I'm not perfectly happy with how it looks, but it's still nice to see that this mode works throughout the refresh rate range. Now to put the performance of the GT27 into perspective, let's take a look at how it stacks up against other monitors. The PD27 has a VA panel as well, but this honestly looks so much better. Okay, yeah, to be fair, the PD27 runs at 240Hz, so of course it looks clearer than the GT27. But even at the same refresh rate, the PD27 looks significantly better. But yeah, it also costs roughly twice as much as the GT27, but it definitely shows that VA panels can have good response times. The Samsung G3 though shows that VA panels can also be even slower. So with VA panels, there's a lot of potential in both directions. When we compare that to a good IPS monitor of the same price class, it looks pretty bad for the Huawei GT27. Though whether this is a problem or not really depends on the games you play and how sensitive you are to smearing. The GT27 still is acceptable for a few casual rounds of something like COD, if you're not someone who's super competitive or very picky about dark level smearing. By the way, if you like my videos and want to support this channel, I have a Patreon link down below. So is the GT27 worth picking up? I think it's a quite specific monitor, which only a few people will really like and should actually consider picking up. If you want an affordable but premium looking monitor that's great for watching videos and SDR movies, the GT27 is a good option. It's not the best gaming monitor, not by a long stretch, but it will still do a decent job for casual gaming. Though if you're more into FPS games and more serious about response times and such, you should definitely consider getting an IPS monitor like the X27Q instead. I'll link that video on screen right now. The HP has a worse contrast ratio, but it's a much better gaming monitor for fast-paced gaming. Thanks for watching, bis zum nächsten Video.